So hi there, my name is Danielle Neely. Many people know me as Dan O'Neely, your host of Industry Edge podcast, where we're going to talk with leaders working in and for the hardest working industries like manufacturing, distribution, construction, and more. This episode is brought to you by K&C Marketing. K&C helps B2B industrial companies grow their brand and increase sales. K&C is a full-service marketing agency that partners with B2B companies to either serve as a fully outsourced marketing partner or help supplement their in-house marketing teams. To learn more about K&C marketing and brand and website services, visit kncmarketingagency.com. So on today's episode, we're thrilled to welcome a true powerhouse in the water and wastewater industry, Dustin Dowdy. He has 20 years of experience under his belt, and he's made waves as the president of Southeastern Tank, and he's also the president and CEO of Custom Pump and Controls. Beyond his impressive experience in water storage, distribution, water quality management, wastewater, stormwater collection, and treatment, Dustin's a devoted husband and father. He's also a music lover at heart and a passionate advocate for the special needs community and animal welfare. So we're excited to dive into his story. Dustin, welcome to the show. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Okay, so first things first, we're going to keep it simple. So just tell me a little bit more about you and what your company does.
So Southeastern Tank is we'll call it almost like a hybrid organization at this point, but it started out kind of very simply in the late 70s. My dad and godfather were approached about getting into what was called the harvest store dealership business at the time, which was building grain silos, mainly for dairy farms. So they were looking for a distribution network across North America. They were helped to get into the business as they were former home builders. At the time in my life, we moved from Atlanta, Georgia to Cleveland, Tennessee. They set up shop in Sweetwater, Tennessee, and started to build, a silo here, a silo there. I had some success. We were granted or, given more territory, including Middle Tennessee, which precipitated my family's move from Cleveland, Tennessee to Murfreesboro, which I consider to be my hometown, even though I lived there from the age of 8 to 18, but that's kind of where I grew up. And then I went off to North Carolina and, kind of took a different direction in life. My dad continued in the business, but during the 80s and 90s, a lot of things transpired and happened. There was a lot of change in the industry. The traditional dairy farm started to go away. And my godfather at that time decided to move, back to Atlanta and sort of get into a different business. And my dad decided to sort of stick it out. And around that time was when there was a transition happening with some of the older harvest store dealers to move into a new space to get into liquid storage, and primarily started on came out of the wastewater, farm wastewater side, then came into a few water tanks here and there. And so I would say around 1981, 1982, my dad had done a couple of things along the way, but really 84, 85 is when that transition happened. And then as he was a new player in an existing market, a very well-established market, he had a lot of struggles along the way. And in the early 90s, there were some EPA regulations that changed, especially when it comes to landfills. And so it's funny to say that, essentially the path of this company changed because of trash. But as they discovered over time that when rain saturates a landfill, when rain filters its way through garbage, and garbage is continually decomposing, there's some nasty, nasty stuff that's created, and it gets into the environment, gets into the groundwater, shows up in river, lakes, and streams. So massive regulation that came across. A lot of existing landfills were closed. Landfills became where they had to be, all this rainwater had to be captured, treated before it went back to the environment, which involved a lot of tanks because you've got to capture the water that filters through. So when you have heavy rain, and that water is going to go to a low point. So that really changed the fortunes of what Southeastern Tank became, because it gave the base, market for my dad to work from. While he continued to try to build the water storage market. So went from some very lean years in the early 90s to doing better by the end of that decade. In January of 2000, for a variety of reasons, a lot of personal reasons, I decided to move back to Tennessee from North Carolina. And at this time, my dad had been through some health struggles. He had dealt with some aneurysms in his aorta. And in December of 2000, he went in for a second repair, and lo and behold, really never came back to work. He, proceeded to leave for another about 5.5 years after that point. But it did shorten his life, and it really kind of took him out of the years that he should have been enjoying his efforts. And so it's something that's kind of made an indelible mark on my life and how I view what's important. Because I kind of watched this thing. Now, the one thing I'll say with my dad was probably, I think he finally learned how to be bored through that process, because he could not sit still. He could not really enjoy things. Everything had to be a challenge or a project or a goal or something that he had to achieve. And so that's probably the thing that I inherited from my dad the most, is that I'm not really an achievement person. I don't sit around and talk about, when we have achieved this. I'm always thinking about what we're doing next. And so that was, if anything, when you think about, sort of like what you learn from your parent from a business perspective, that was the thing that I did not realize I was inheriting from my dad. And kind of one day you wake up and you go, I'm acting just like him. And the joke at Southeastern at this point, of course, is always, what crazy idea will Dustin come up with next? And so that sort of that passion and drive to constantly be thinking about, whether it's building the better mousetrap or what's the market, that we need to be looking at, paying attention to what's happening in the market space. But when I showed up kind of on my dad's doorstep in January of 2000, before his surgery and things kind of that, there was a plan in place. He was looking for an exit strategy. He had looked at potentially selling the business. And when I first arrived in that month, he was not necessarily thrilled to see me. He just kind of was like, and I was kind of hung around for a little bit. And he finally said, well, I guess if you're going to be here, you might as well work here.
Oh my gosh. That's
that's truly the way the conversation went. And he had gotten some pressure from the tank supplier, the manufacturer of Aquastore, that he needed some, had to have some sort of outside sales presence.
Okay.
And of course he would always say, well, I don't need that. My customers know me, so on and so forth. So I kind of showed up on the scene, and kind of that was the space I immediately was pushed into, is that, and as the famous story goes, he pulled out a legal pad and drew a picture of a tank and showed me about 3 accessories and kind of slid it across the desk and said, okay, that's it, go sell that. And that was my training. So I, kind of went out into a marketplace with no understanding of how water was collected, how it was treated, how it was distributed. I just knew that we built tanks, and when I knew what the attributes of what we did, I did have some background in coding, so I could have at least intelligent discussions about that. But it was a huge learning curve, and it's funny now, sort of being the guy that I was trying to sell to 25 years ago, getting into my mid 50s now. And as young people come into the industry and trying to remember what it was like trying to be that person talking to a person of my age and my experience. And that was probably one of the biggest impacts that I can remember during that, those first 5 or 6 years, where, my dad was sick and he wasn't necessarily working. The name Shelley will come up many, many times probably in this conversation, but Shelley Farmer, who is one of the owners of Southeastern Tank, as via my dad's will, came to work for my dad when she was 19.
Wow.
Actually showed up by accident. My dad was looking for what we would call a secretary back then, and we would call it an administrative assistant now. Yeah. He was trying to find a secretary, and he tried to call the phone number for the job service in Murfreesboro. He dialed the wrong number, and she dialed Shelley's mother's house. And this woman answers, and my dad just starts talking and says, I'm looking for a person with this kind of aptitude and this kind of background. And the lady said, sir, I don't know, or I should say Shelley's mom said, I don't know who you were trying to reach, but I have a 19-year-old daughter that's here that might be the perfect fit for that. And
oh my gosh.
She literally she literally like left the house and drove to Dad's office, and they met, and the rest is history. So she is began in 1989, and so she's in her 35th year. So I knew Shelley before I graduated from high school. Not in depth or, but we knew each other, and then I think she attended my first wedding and things of that nature. But we got thrown together because of my dad's illness, kind of like, now what we do.
Right.
My dad was capable of helping with certain things, but his injury, we'll call it, that was caused by the surgery, he had some short-term memory loss, which made it difficult for us to have working conversations on things moving forward. He could remember a lot, anything from the surgery before that, but remembering the details of a conversation he had day to day was a challenge. And so we had some really, really rough times during that phase where we felt a lot of pressure from the tank manufacturer that, they looked at it as these two kids are now running the show, and can they do it? We fortunately had a few allies that kind of stuck with us. And so we kind of started making our way at that time. So my dad passed in June of 2006. So that was, obviously a milestone type situation where if we felt like we were running the show at that point, then we were running the show. And it was basically ours to win or lose at. So the thing that I guess if I was ever to tell someone, if you ever find yourself in that situation, immediately start looking for help. For help outside of yourself, outside of your own understanding. Around 2013, I joined a roundtable, business, owners or managers group, and really started to figure out what I didn't know and how I thought I knew that I really didn't know. So I wish I would have done that sooner. I would have done it earlier. But sometimes, and then when I rewind the clock and I start thinking about that time period, 2007 through 13, there were so many unique events that happened. There were so many unique changes that happened that you really are in survival mode. It's hard to think about a future plan or start thinking about how to, the famous phrase, how to work on the business when all you're doing is working in the business to survive. And anybody who's ever been, the case with you and Michelle, anybody that's been in a startup situation, there's no such thing as delegation because it's you. And so we found ourselves it was just the two of us. And, we obviously had our construction crews, and we eventually brought in some other individuals in that time frame, and many of which are still here today and are integral parts of our success. But, those lessons are invaluable. And not saying that I understood what I was learning at the time. It took years later to understand. And what you hear these cliches all the time. If you spend any time on LinkedIn, or you have any sort of, bent towards in your, social media life or your YouTube life, where you're looking for TED Talks, or you're looking for interviews with business leaders and everything else, everyone says a lot of the same things about how you don't learn from your successes, you learn from your failures and everything. And you hear that and you go, well, what does that mean? Does that really mean that I'm, that I need to fail to be able to learn? But then you look back and you go, I really did learn a lot from things that we did wrong and the things that we didn't do again. And so if you're willing to learn from that, it can be as valuable as outside knowledge. It can be as valuable as, hiring a consultant or, joining, like I said, a roundtable group to learn certain things. And I think all of those things are important. Currently the leadership team business coach we work with, he talks about all the different phases of learning that go on, whether that's individual, as a group, as a team, in a large setting, almost a classroom type setting, that if you're ever not learning what you don't know, then you feel like you're going to plateau. That, again, that ties back to what I talked about at the very beginning. That's sort of that drive that I'm never really satisfied with what I know today. If I'm not learning, then I'm going backwards a little bit. And every time I've ever been involved with any sort of educational process, whether it's roundtable group, working with business coaches, whatever, my adamant thing was always, don't give me a business book to read. you know, I have this love-hate relationship with business books because they're basic concepts that have been tried and true for decades. And it seems like the next new book that comes along that's all the rage is a repackaging of those existing ideas. And so I would get, kind of frustrated, like I don't need to read yet another book about, who moved my cheese or, sales strategy and all this other stuff. Yep. But I had to check myself with that and realize that, if that was going to be my attitude, then I've also decided to quit learning. So, what I would say, if I look back and say what I've learned from the start of my career to now, is about that learning process, and understanding that that the old, my favorite cliche, if you're the smartest person in the room, you're in the wrong room. I don't really like that statement, because it makes it sound like you can't learn from someone that necessarily isn't smarter than you. And that's not the case. I will say that there were two very, very important mentors that I had in my life. They were in the same business in different parts of the country. And these were people that I knew that I could trust, that I could call and to get advice, and so all of these things, if you made a list, you have to put them all on there. You don't succeed without essentially by learning and with the help of others.
Absolutely. Well, that was there's a lot, first off, a lot to unpack with the fact that you just moved your family over. Like, if that doesn't show the heart that you have of like, your dad wasn't doing well, picked up and moved your family back.
Well, actually I moved alone. It is, and so that's, essentially a part of the story, is that, my first wife and I were very young when we got married. And when my dad got sick, there were a variety of reasons, but I felt like it was time for me to move back to Tennessee. And when I suggested this to her, where her entire family was there, she was very vested there with a community and a church and everything. And her, response to me was that she was not willing to do that. We were at an impasse and I had to make a decision. It was, not an easy decision. So I essentially moved back. We, shortly thereafter divorced. But there were personal reasons for it. Obviously I felt an obligation to my dad and to my family. But in that regard, I did uproot my life, sort of when I knew.
How old were you then?
Let's see.
January 2000, right?
Yeah, I think I just turned, let's see, what would it have been? I would have just turned 20.
Do math.
28.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so did you envision, like you knew your dad did this. It's like you said you walked in there and you were like, I don't know anything about it. I know we do tanks, but and he gave you a couple pointers on it. But did you ever envision you being in the business eventually? Like, was that part of your plan? Like, if you were to say when you were little, like, did your dad ever talk about you being a part of the business, or was it more, did you have other goals and dreams? Like, what did you want to be when you grew up, I guess?
This sounds like, kind of sour grapes when I say this, but I was not on my dad's list of potentials. I was, my dad was married before. He was married to my mother. I have an older half sister who is an accountant and very successful in her own right. He was very, very obviously, she never lived with us and we moved away from Georgia, as I've told the story. And so he wasn't as involved in her life. So he kind of, had to live kind of a little bit vicariously with, just talking to her. And so then I come along and I was a little too opinionated and of my own mind for my dad's liking, even though I was just the carbon copy of him. And then my younger brother, Chris, who also works in the business, they had a different relationship. And so my dad always kind of, looked at me as that, I was this, and, he understood that, I had capabilities and certain skills, but he always looked at them as what I could do somewhere else in the world. It was never about what I would do here. At one time when I was in North Carolina, I was in the midst of a job change. And I actually, kind of suggested to him the idea that while I lived in Western North Carolina, that I could come over and do sales work for him in Georgia and say East Tennessee. And No, he wasn't having that. So
Dang, this is a tough guy to crack.
yeah, so when I say that when I showed up and I basically just stuck around long enough till I got hired, that it's almost like I'm I'm going to get this wrong saying this, but I was kind of like the it's almost like the widow's mite, where if I kept showing up every day and just kept making a little more, then maybe he finally, and it finally broke him down a little bit. And I love to laugh about this, that after he got sick and was kind of out of the business, every tank project that we would pick up, that I would be somewhat involved in, his comment would always be like, "Oh yeah, I know him. I know he likes our tank. I've worked with or
He
I
like
got
doesn't
no
like to
credit,
put him.
zero
Oh,
credit
yeah.
for any of those things." And then the one first really major project that I was involved in is we built a what's called a composite elevated tank. So it's one of our traditional ground tanks put on a concrete pedestal. And he was mortified. I mean, just absolutely just horrified, the idea that we would even take on this and this risk and everything else. And so while we ended up doing that one project, he tried very hard to keep us out of it as hard as he could. It was just a little too far down the path. So yeah, it was not, it's not one of those things that, like I said, I don't think I ever had sort of the idea, probably past in early, say 10, 11 years old, there was never any thought process that one day I would work for my dad. When I was little, probably going back, if you go back a little further, the story that I like to tell is, when my dad was out selling harvesters to farmers, and he was driving all over East Tennessee and visiting with, he had in the trunk of his car is where he kept all of his brochures and all that other stuff. And one time I took some of the brochures out and I set up the little kitty card table, or what you would call the kitty Thanksgiving table.
Right.
I set it up in the basement. I unplugged one of the phones in the house back, when we had one phone line in the house. And I took that phone and I set it on the table and I put the brochures, and I made Chris sit across from me, and I sold him harvesters. So, so
sales was in your blood from a very young age, whether you knew it or not.
Yeah, I would have been blessed or cursed, however you want to look at it. I can talk a lot. And I have the ability to sort of carry on conversations and develop relationships through communication. And so it's just something that I got. It's a God-given thing. And my dad was a very persuasive and impactful, person. There's a gazillion stories that I can tell about, the things that my dad did that, I still look back to this day and think, it explains why I do some of the things that I do, but in the moment you don't look at it that way. But no, it was never in the plan. It was never, oh, we're going to, Dad was he even tried to hire my sister's first husband to come to work, to sort of take over the business.
Okay.
He was the first choice, not me. so yeah. So, it's a very, very interesting, thing to say, because, and it's not, and again, it sounds like, I'm almost like you're sitting on a therapist's couch when you say some of these things, but it's like, I don't think my dad ever truly believed that I had the capability to run the company. Now, there were things, as a father does, or any parent does with any child, you kind of see them in a certain light. And one of the other aqua store distributors said to me one time, he said, it's hard to, when you've changed somebody's diapers, to really truly appreciate what their capabilities are as an adult. Whoa. Because they will always be in your mind. That's that deep. They're this, and you as a mother, I hear, Nicole say this all the time about, my babies have grown up. You always will have them in that certain context. And right. So, I can completely understand and appreciate that now as a parent. It was very, obviously very, very frustrating, when I didn't have children, and I didn't understand why he could just never, we could never see eye to eye. We could never get on the same page. And but it's all the things now that they all make sense. They just really do.
Yeah. Well, your heart is right. You can feel that your heart is right, especially like you say, your brother's a part of the business now. You had Shelly, who's been there, since she was 19, and then a ton of other people that have been there forever. So you guys are clearly doing, people stick around with jobs because of the people and the leadership that they're surrounded by. So tell me a little bit more about, it was just you two, and then you had construction people and different thing like that. But talk to me a little bit more about how that structure has evolved and your leadership and the way that you kind of approached that, because you realized you couldn't do it by yourself. And so how did you kind of build those people up, and what does it look like today?
I think I say this all the time about, the title of my TED Talk will be, or the title of my book when I write it one day will be the following. So, if I was going to tell the story of how to grow, from, essentially a small company into a larger company, especially in a family context, it'd be like, here's all the pitfalls that you have to be aware of. Here's all the things you have to get past. But the joke always is that we grew through inbreeding and nepotism, because it's like when you start telling the stories, it's kind of like, this person, there's so many overlaps in existing relationships. So, told the Shelley story, obviously said my story. Then at one point, Shelley's husband was hired. He came in to be sort of our, equipment mechanic. We had, the type of equipment we use, we had never done any maintenance on the stuff. And so he started down, basically getting that up to speed and getting to the point where, and then that morphed into, my brother shows up, around 2008. And then the two of them, Shelley's husband and my brother, then become what we call our service crew. We went out and started doing tank inspections, and we started doing these other things that we saw happen in the industry. And then you take Mark Nichols, our director of sales. Mark was somebody that I knew in the industry, like I met from going to trade shows and industry events and things of that nature. And we ended up being best friends. And he worked for a manufacturer's rep. So in other words, he represented all kinds of different products. We got involved in a project in North Georgia. We needed somebody that did telemetry and SCADA. Mark did that. So we pulled Mark in. Mark got to know Shelley. So the two of them started. So one day when the pressure started being applied, we wanted to bring on a new state to our territory. We were adding Louisiana to our traditional territory at the time of Tennessee, Georgia, Alabama, and Mississippi. And they basically said, not unless you hire another salesperson, because at the time I was by myself covering 4 states. And so I knew Mark from the industry. I didn't want to hire my best friend to come to work for me because I wanted my friends to be separate from my work. And Shelley was like, we got to hire Mark. They're not going to give us Louisiana. She had developed a rapport with him. And so we were able, Mark came on in 2007. Around the same time, we started looking for, an administrative assistant, and had a couple of people that came in and kind of came and went. And I set my sights on somebody that I knew. And then through the relationship with one of the industry associations, one of the ladies that knew that I was looking for, she said, well, I have my neighbor. He is the manager of a bank in Watertown, and they're closing that branch, or they're reorganizing, and she's looking for a job. And so that's how Tina Page came to work here. And so Tina came in, and she came in to do administrative duties. She being a bank manager, she had some, accounting experience and everything else. And then here we are, however many years later, year 16, 17 with Tina, and she now runs our concrete and our foundation crews. She's ASI certified. She's taken multiple classes. So she came in to do one thing, and then she's morphed into this completely other individual. So, these are people that have been key to our success. And, your statement about people stay, because of the people they work with and their leadership. And I'm going to be absolutely honest when I say this. I'm not really sure how most people stayed here between about 2007 and about 2014 or 15, because I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know how to really truly manage an organization or lead people. You see the memes all the time, how a leader leads from the front and a boss leads from the rear and all these other things. And, again, that goes back to, I didn't know what I didn't know. And Shelley has a certain skill set that, is really about, she's amazing with estimating. She's been our chief estimator on all tank construction, all types of construction through our history. But she's also been our primary accountant. We would call her our comptroller, or even our CFO. And so, but Shelley was, again, when you're kind of working that space, it's not necessarily a team leadership space. You're working with very, very specifics. You're working with data. You're working with numbers. And so we kind of got to hit this moment where where we had a leadership void, where the two of us really couldn't really figure out how to run the organization together. Who was supposed to be lead. So we kind of separated into, she would do operations and I would do sales. And and we had, new salespeople that came in 2009 and 11, 12, 13. We had multiple salespeople that come in, kind of came and went. And during that time that, I was just didn't understand how to lead people. And my frustration would be, why is this so easy? It's so obvious. Just, you just do this. Why can't you just do this? And so I quickly started to learn and understand that, the way that you present, how you are handling situations, how you are going to address, problems and things of that nature, and understanding that, I began to notice something that I probably haven't ever noticed in my life up until this moment, is that, sports are great analogies for business, because there's so many, things that you can talk about. But one of the things we don't talk enough about is that there's the guy that makes the mistake, that loses the game or shifts, the tide of the game, or shifts the momentum, whether it's throwing the interception, striking out, whatever those things are. And one of the things that I started to really pay attention to is how the team responds to those things. And what you see is that when an individual makes the mistake, the team tends to rally around that individual, because they know that, any of them are capable of doing the same thing. Baseball is probably, the one I love to use most of the analogies with, because when you're at the plate or you're on the pitcher's mound, it's mano a mano, but yet you're playing as a team. And so that is a very, very unique, thing that I didn't really understand and learn, because I would look at my own mistakes and I would criticize my own mistakes. And I was so very critical of everything that I did. And then that would spill out over to being critical with others. And so was I a leader during that time? No. Was I a, quote, a boss? Yeah. I was 100% that person. And one of the other things that I had to understand is that you can make a lot of good changes that really end up with a lot of bad results. If the people aren't ready, if the capacity isn't there, if the understanding isn't there and everything else, and you try to force too much change too quickly, because change is hard. Yeah. And if you anticipate or you think that everybody's just going to accept 5 changes in a month period that they're supposed to understand and master, and those, you're kidding yourself. And so that was probably that's when I talk about that, that time frame of 2012, 2013, where I just understood that I didn't know what I was doing. And I would love to have recordings of the things I would go to these meetings and say, because I would look back now and say, what an idiot. I mean, because
what was I thinking?
Well, I was so outward facing with every problem is because somebody's not doing their job. Somebody just can't follow these things. And so learning to understand how people think and how you have to approach others was the biggest change for me personally. We got involved with a couple of companies, one that we still use today, that's about taking personality profiles and matching them with others, and understanding that this person has to be led and taught in this way, as opposed to this person, their learning skill, in other words, has to be this way. I don't want to get into a long discussion about this, but watching my kids go through school it has been very, very frustrating, because as you can see, the way that school is taught and the way that the idea of a common core mentality, which is that I think it's the wrong way to approach, because people learn differently. And people achieve certain things differently. It's a well-known fact with anybody that's around me. I have a very high-functioning autistic son, and the way he learns and the things that he excels at, and over here, if you take that approach, then he should be able to excel over in this subject or master this skill, and he's not going to. And so when you're dealing with special needs people tend to accept that. They kind of look at, their skill set is only to this. Whereas with the general population, with typical individuals, we're taking on this mentality, everybody's going to learn the same way. Everybody's going to understand the same way. And that is I think it's a huge failure. Another sports analogy, if you have anybody under the age of 45, they're not going to know some of these references I'm about to make. But John Wooden is one of the most famous basketball coaches ever known. He won 11, 12 national championships at UCLA. And I watched this VHS video about the history of basketball one time, and they were interviewing. And he was
I got some of those in my mom's attic.
There you go. Yeah. The go, you know, and I go back all the way to Betamax. So yeah, but with on this tape, they were interviewing John Wooden. He was talking about his first national championship team, and he had two guards, and he basically said one was an introvert, one was an extrovert. I had to coddle one, and I had to challenge the other.
Yep.
I had to encourage one, and I had to basically push the other. And so he said, and if I would have coached them the same, or vice versa, I would have never gotten the level of play and the production out of those players. And so I started to understand that, what that really truly meant, and how to, so, you know, started to take a different approach. And you want to talk about, you know, we all talk about, you know, baggage in our lives and our, you know, experiences, the things you bring into a marriage, the things you bring into relationships, things you bring into parenting, or how you develop friendships over time. You know, you kind of look at all of these things and you say to yourself, you know, how am I treating others? And if I've given you a reason to fear me, if I've given you a reason to avoid me, if I've given you a reason to, you know, not like me, that's a lot to repair. And so taking the approach, if I could ever go back and do maybe anything differently, would be the way to approach something of how to get the best out of people by developing the relationship at where they are, and meeting people where they are, and understanding that the way you think, the way you see things is very, very different. And if you're dealing with a growing organization and you have existing people that have worked with you with years, and you sort of move into that, we have a tendency to focus on new people coming in and how to, you know, maximize those relationships and how to maximize the training of those individuals. But you have to do that with the people that have gotten you there as well. You have to go back. And so, you know, one of the things that, for example, that I avoided for years and years and years was I can't stand doing one-to-ones. I felt like it was this one more thing that I had to put on my calendar, that I had to develop an agenda for, that I had to know what I was going to talk about before I got there. And then, you know, finally being sort of strong-armed and being told, like, this has to happen, you have to do it. And realizing it's that person coming to you and you saying, what can I do to make your job easier, to make your job better, or help you achieve your goals? And
listening to them versus you having to tell them like where they're at.
The most, and you know, one of the books that I read, you know, much to my chagrin at the time, the key, the whole thing in the whole book was the most powerful question you can ask somebody is, what else? So if I said, you know, Daniel, tell me how you make your, you know, your apple pie recipe. And you're telling me this isn't, and I say at the end of that, what else? You'd be shocked. You may have given me the recipe line for line, item by item, but if I ask what else, there may be that one trick that you forgot to list.
Yep.
You'll go, oh, and don't forget that, you know, while it's, you know, most recipes will say put it in the oven at 350. If you have a gas oven, you may want to turn it down a little bit. So you know, and that what else question, because it brings out the more and the more. And also the most important question is, how can I help? Not what I need you to do. Those are very, very powerful. You know, what else and how can I help are two very, very powerful questions. You
as the leader will be able to dissect, okay, like, where is that coming from? Is it a feeling? Is it actually something that they know? And so asking that question, and it's so much more empathetic, like, how can I help versus like, what can you do differently? It comes from such an empathetic, it brings people's guards down and it makes them feel like they can talk to you and that you actually care. I love that. Do you think that, so you said like back in the day that really wasn't your approach. Why do you feel like people stuck around? Like the people that have been there for a long time, and then now like where you guys are at, it seems your retention is pretty good. Like,
yeah.
Do you feel like you have a special?
Right. I could, you know, again, I probably, just because of the way that I'm wired, I will talk more about the failures than I will about the things that we did right. But if the one thing that, that we definitely inherited from my dad was the importance of taking care of people. And so I would say that most of the people that stayed here over time, despite all of the things that I did wrong, despite all the things that Shelley and I didn't know that we didn't know, and trying to find the right structure, the old, got the right person in the right seat on the bus. And so we were always Shelley and I were always in the wrong seat. We always had everybody else in the wrong seat. That's one thing. But you can if you're on the bus and the bus is climate controlled and is full of gas and is actually going somewhere, people have a tendency to stay on the bus. So one of the things that I probably have done right is I've always had some sort of level of vision of where we were going and what we were doing. And I've been able to, to get people to embrace that vision. But more importantly, when I talk about taking care of people, when my dad got sick, he went through one $5 million health insurance policy, and then went through a second $5 million insurance policy. Eventually had to move into the VA care, and kind of watching how that was happening with insurance companies. As a matter of fact, I had a claim for a doctor's visit or something minor. It got declined during that time because I had the same last name. And had to go and actually kind of had to get our broker to sort of fight through the situation, because they were basically just lumping me in as a family member, not an individual, policy holder. That made, obviously a huge impact on me, sort of that thought process. We've paid for funerals. We have paid for people to fly to go to family funerals across the country because they couldn't afford to travel. We've had some, we've paid some hospital bills. We've done things that, a lot of places would not do.
They won't. Yeah.
And, when you're a smaller company, those are options that you can do. You have a lot more leeway in making those decisions. So that level of care that I might be mad at you because of what you did yesterday, if I'm thinking about myself in, say, 2011, but if you would told me the next day that you're sick or somebody in your family is sick, then that whole conversation
doesn't matter.
Switches. Had an individual one time that worked here, and I noticed via his expense reports that he was not traveling. He was not really going anywhere. And that's, if you're a traveling salesperson, obviously that's one of the things that you need to be doing on a regular basis. And when I asked, directly what the issue was, he said, well, I have my mother's passed, my dad's in ill health, and I have 2 half sisters that just will not do anything to help. And it's kind of fallen to me. And my statement to the person at the time is, I said, if you would have told me that on the front end, we would have come up with a plan, and I'd have told you that becomes priority 1. And then we would have done what we needed to do to support you on the back end of that. So
people are so afraid, though. It's I think that's something that, unfortunately, so many other businesses and careers, it's things like that, people didn't prioritize it. So I think people have this apprehension to share that personal side of I'm at work, I can't share this, but you're extracting and opening that conversation up for people to come to you for those things, which is amazing.
It happened this week. I had someone that had been out on leave, has not been back to work very long, and had something with that, has cropped back up, and literally came and said, I've been told I have to take off X number of days, and I'm worried I'm going to lose my job. And I'm like, well, no, you're not. And this is the reasons why, because, that is what you've invested in the company and what we've invested in you. And what your impact is, this right now is what's most important, is that you get better. And so, I think that is people understand that we do care. People understand that during those years that, despite all of my failings and all of the things we did wrong, is that we still took care of people. And so you would probably have to ask, certain individuals, why did you stay at certain times? What was the, and I don't even know what they would, what their response
answer would be.
So I'm guessing as much as I am answering right now, because I look back and with certain people, I'm like, why in the world did you stay here? I don't know. That's what I was.
You say that, but your heart is speaking out, and everything that you've said is the reason why people stay. And I think that's where people, right now, everyone's struggling with turnover and retention. It's such a, like, across all of our clients, we see it. And it's like, and sometimes people just leave. Sometimes the person wasn't meant to be there. But I think a lot of the time, it's like, if you can hire the right person and give them that right, guidance and leadership of like, this person needs to be given a guideline and this person wants to run, like they're going to do it and then they're going to ask for feedback later. But understanding that and like leaning into their gifts versus being like, hey, you just need to fit a mold makes all of the difference there.
I think probably my favorite, story as far as that, how that, that statement go is, somebody, it's actually that we have a project bidding at 2 p.m. today with this individual. So in 2009, a guy named Jeff Harrison came to work here. He was a consultant engineer. Actually had done a couple of projects with him when he was at the engineering firm he worked at in Montgomery. Kind of approached me. I had seen him at a trade show, and I said, hey, I'm looking to hire someone to cover a certain territory. If you know anybody that be qualified or might be looking for a job. Well, he called me about 2 weeks later and said that he was interested, and I was kind of like, wow. So he came on and did a great job from 2009 to 2013. But one of the things that I started to notice with him is that because he came from that consultant background, and especially having an engineering mentality, Jeff really struggled with just the sales portion of it. It was like he wanted to engineer everything. He wanted to be that consultant, but there came that moment where you had to get sort of almost forceful and say, it's time for you to, tell I've invested this in you. You need to return the favor. And that's where his struggle was. That wasn't necessarily who he was as a person. So he was given an opportunity to go back into consulting with a different company. They were able to offer him some things that I couldn't give him at the time as far as ownership, potential over time. When he came in and told me that he had decided to take this job, I was like, I knew that was the best thing for him.
Right.
And I didn't want to lose him, the person, because he's one of the best quality people I've ever worked with. And here we are, almost, over 10 years later, where we're still working together in a different capacity, and he's better off and I'm better off. Because he's where he should be. Another person that, I truly, loved and adored when she worked here, as far as just her personality, she brought so much like joy and laughter to the company, was the comic relief of everything. It was just great to be around. And, she left because she realized she was not built for the close context of this type and size business. That when you're in a smaller space and you're dealing with people more face to face, that was not her, even though she had this personality. And so she ended up working, sort of in a regional sales structure, sort of like an inside salesperson, I think with Office Depot or something like that. And she thrived because it was a more impersonal thing, but like she needed her work life to be that. And her personality to be a part of her personal life and her family life. She needed more just clock in, clock out structure than we could give. And so, now that, she's kind of moved on and is doing some other stuff, I got a chance to have a conversation with her, like 10 years removed. And she just said, wow, I didn't fit the culture. And you would, in your brain, you're going, how is that possible? Like you brought all
fun and nice. Yeah.
You were you were the life of the party. You were the, and everything else. And realizing, and Nicole and her are still like close friends to this day because she went and did what was the right thing for her. And so that may be the trickiest part of the whole, the right person in the right seat on the bus. Is that, some people may have the skill to be in the seat, but the bus may be wrong. It may not be their bus. Some people need to be, with, a different type structure. They need to be in a fleet instead of one thing.
You read the bus book, huh? What's that called? Have you read the bus book? It's like really small. Oh my gosh. It's good. But it's like to get on the positive. But it's, if you're not on the right bus, but if you're not in the right seat, all of that, I'll have to find the book. And Andrew made me read it. And
I'll even rewind a little bit and talk about, for example, with Tina, somebody that has stayed on the bus this whole time and had been in the wrong seat for years. And part of the reason she was in the wrong seat is that I kept her there. I had her strapped into that seat. She was going to do contract management and handle payroll, and I could not envision her as a project manager. I could not see her, dealing on the construction side with certain things. It wasn't because she was a woman, had nothing to do with that. I had just boxed her into, you're a numbers person. You're really good at going through these complex documents and pulling this stuff, everything else. So when she first came to me and said that she wanted to take an ACI class, she just asked, she said, if you'll pay for this first class, she said, if I fail, I'll pay you back. I'm like, okay, that works. And so it went from the one to the next, to the next, to the next. I don't even know what level certification she said. They're all over the walls in her office now. And she now writes our concrete specs. I had a guy call me from Western Canada the other day about a problem on a concrete structure that they'd done and had some questions, and I answered to the best of my ability. I said, but really, I need to let you talk to an expert. And so it's like, so the fact that I had not allowed her to get out of that seat and get into the seat actually where her passion and where she wanted to go for as long as I did, that's on me. And so sometimes you think that you've got the people in the right seat, but you don't. Yeah. Because you're not, and that's where again, that one-to-one communication where you start talking about people and the structure of what are your goals? What are the things that you want to develop? What are the things that what do you want to be better at? And those are as critical in my mind is those questions. Just you may have the right person, but you've pigeonholed them in the wrong seat.
Oh, that's so good. I like it. That's so true, though. It's like you have this perception, and it's like you're blocking this person from potentially stepping into their true calling. Oh, I like it. Okay, so this has been great. I have one last question. So looking ahead, we talked a lot about you coming in as a legacy business owner. What do you hope to leave behind, on Southeastern Tank and Custom Pumping Controlled? What legacy do you hope to leave with those businesses, which we didn't even touch on Custom Pump, but you're also running a whole other business here. But how do you envision a legacy being left on those?
That is probably the most challenging question because again, my dad didn't have necessarily the intent of a legacy. It wasn't, I'm going to build this business and eventually my two sons are going to work here. I don't think that was ever in the structure. If you ask, Chuck told me one day that he was going to work here. He was going to carry a briefcase and wear a tie every day. So
you're like, I don't do that, but
but the point being is that I don't necessarily think as much about where the company goes to, whether it's it continues. If a third generation ownership would go into place at any given point, or if something else might happen. It's a very, very challenging thing to do just because of the way tax laws work and everything else. For me, when I think legacy, the fact that as long as y'all have been around, you've heard, all this discussion about, my dad's probably main mantra was, do what you say and say what you do. And so that always rings in my head. And when we really went to look at, the core values of the business, safety always being number one, quality, accountability, integrity, and respect, we treat everything we do on those things. That's probably, for me, that's probably the most important part. Is that will anybody after I'm gone or I've left the business or whatever, will they say that I followed those core values? That those things were actually the way that I did business, the way that I did treat others. That's really the thing that concerns me. My dad, there were most of them, some of them passed away now, some of them have retired now, but sort of the customers that I inherited from my dad, the things that I would hear them say about him, that I called him and I said, this is the problem, this is the issue. And he told me this, and that's exactly what he did, or that's exactly what happened. And I realized that, when he was in that startup phase and he was in that, moment where trying to sell a product that no one had ever used before into an industry that didn't need the product. The only way he got to where he was telling people, this is what we're going to do. This is how it's going to work. And it did. And so he started to build that, that legacy and, protecting that. We did a whole, video with you guys about that legacy with Wattsville Utility District, where, my dad and the dad were working together. And then my dad went away and I came along and I was working with the dad. And now that dad has retired and I'm working with the son. And so that legacy of it continuing on, and the people that we are, that meet our core values as customers, that we always want to retain as customers. That's the thing that's important to me. And, having, Megan forcing me to rewatch all of the videos that we did over and over again. You
love that, right?
Yeah. Listen, there's nothing worse than just sitting around and listening to yourself talk a lot. Just like, okay, let's look at another video of me talking.
Great, and then say that looks great.
But it's one of those things. Sometimes when you use the terminology, I heard myself say in one of those videos, I heard myself say, we have never. Our goal has never been to be the biggest. Mm-hmm. We just want to be the best. And if we can't be the best at what we do, then we're not going to do that. There's plenty of initiatives or things or crazy ideas that I came up with. We're going to go do this. And I realized very, very quickly, we're not going to be the best at that. All we're going to be is one more thing. We're going to be one more, name in a book. We're going to be one more name of a supplier, and we're not going to be the best at that. Creating the whole chemical division, creating solutions. Again, if we weren't going to be the best at it, because we knew we were never going to be the biggest. There's the suppliers are huge, and they're Fortune 500 companies and our international companies and everything else. And we saw that there was an opportunity to fill a certain need in a certain space, and taking that on, and we have intentionally not grown it any faster than, are we the best at it?
Yeah.
And that to me is the one legacy that, is that if anybody would say anything about me, is that, we did not overpromise and underdeliver. We did not say something we were going to do and we didn't do it without saying we're not capable of this. We're dealing with a, difficult situation right now with a particular client and a particular, thing else. And we're looking at, walking away from a 7-figure deal because this group does not meet our core values. And we're not willing to sacrifice them for one job.
Right.
Because once you do that, that starts down that sliding slope, and we don't want to go there.
Yep. Like, what is it telling your employees? What is it telling? Yeah, it's bigger. That's a hard decision to make, though. So it truly is. And I've seen, companies within our industry that have grown beyond capacity. In other words, they've taken on more than they can actually perform. And when they start to fail, what they've done is they've created competition that didn't even exist. Mm-hmm. Because they could not do what they said they could do. And if you start down that path and you start to fail people, they're going to look around. They're going to take a moment, and they're going to, and will not even begin to claim that I've done all of those situations right. Probably the one thing that my dad, the reason he could never get past this idea that I was capable of doing certain things was my temper. From the time I was little, I was, if I dropped something, I got angry. If I missed something, I got angry. If I could not give myself any grace whatsoever. And then what that spilled over into is that when you found yourself and you saw others were making mistakes, that same anger, that same temper would come out. Yeah. So I still fight that to this day, of that idea that, people always say this all the time, business is business. Well, when you're personally vested, no, it's not. No, it's personal business, and it's business personal. It's both. Right. And I still to this day have to, I think I mentioned this, like I said, didn't want to reference the other podcast, but one of the things that I tell people all the time, when you find yourself in that moment where you've been wrong, the other party is doing the wrong thing, you are on the hallowed ground, you're standing on the hill, and that you're right. When you feel that emotion come up, what I learned was type out the angriest, nastiest email that you can. Put every emotion in it, put everything else, and just let it sit there and draft. Yep.
and then go back and read it the next day, and then maybe the next day. You don't ever send that email. You don't ever, that's not how
Don't
you
put their email address in there.
in other words, you just, and it doesn't have to be in an email. It can be in, you can just open a Word document and just start typing. But something about, you get into this whole thing about, the purposes of journaling and everything else to get these emotions out. It's amazing to me when you start putting words to paper that you will frame the context differently than the way when your emotion and your mouth, where you're basically just spewing before you think. When you have to think about what you're writing, you think about the next word, you start to process those emotions a little differently. So what we always talk about the angry giraffe. Like sometimes, when you just get to the point, it's like, well, you probably just need to go angry giraffe that. Just let that out. And then we'll actually be able, once you've let the emotion go, now we can start being more logical and strategic and use that intelligence to say, this is how we're going to frame this. I
need to work on that angry draft. Like, because I'm an emotional person. Like, yes.
Obviously you do this with your coworkers, you do this with your friends, you do this with your family, you do this with your spouse, whatever it is that where you say, I got to get this off my chest. Well, sometimes that person may be great about listening, but they're not the person that needs to hear it, and sometimes, I had to, and of course, we laugh about the nepotism, obviously my wife is the, human resources director for both Southeastern and CPC and everything else. And we started having to figure out to pick and choose. Like sometimes I'll say, I'm dealing with a rough situation. You don't need to know the details about it.
Yeah.
You don't need to burden you beyond with that. And if I think about, right now, what I consider to be my quote biggest achievement is, is putting a leadership structure in place of people that are able to, first of all, problem solve, they're able to work on stuff. And one of the things that probably has put the biggest smile on my face over the last couple of years, now that I have these, the correct people doing their jobs, is that there are problems that happen, are dealt with and resolved before I even know they even happen. And that alone is where you've empowered people to do the right thing, because you spend this quality time with them one-to-one, so they understand your vision, they understand your values, and then they start to emulate that because they understand that is the company's vision and values as well. And that has been probably the biggest thing. 2023 for me, as you mentioned, the acquisition of Custom Pump Controls in 2022, and doing a startup business as we did with the chemical business in the same year. That's my TED Talk. Don't start doing acquisition and a startup in the same year. Thanks for coming.
Okay.
That's it. Don't do that.
Jot it down.
It just happened that way. And it was a very, very rough go there for a period of time. And so, but part of the, sort of getting past that again is that we started to take the approach of, we can't change it too fast, can't do too, you can only do what I can do today. And I've got to empower certain people to do their job. I wouldn't begin. I'm still terrible at time management. I still have, I think the last time I got that wonderful email, well-being email from Microsoft that told me that I was spending an average of 20 hours per week in meetings, which is, not necessarily healthy or what you should be doing, but it is the moment we're in. And, right now that's where it needs to be. And once you kind of acknowledge that, resigned to that this is the moment, and you want to get to that next level where you're not necessarily having to do quite as many things. But the overall moment is that, having a group of people that, first of all, that you trust, and obviously they have their trust in you, and with the sort of, we'll call it the priors, those that come before, what we'll call more enlightened Dustin, to those that have come after, trying to get them to understand, why these people react certain ways is because, that they were here for certain things that you have never experienced. So their experiences and their history is a little bit different, but, bringing on, Stephen Whitehouse to be our operations manager, when Jason McGee became essentially available because of an ownership change, and the way he came to work here. I love telling, both the Jason story and the Stephen story very quickly. Jason, he had, worked at a company for 15 years. I knew him very, very well, was very, very close and still am close to with his former boss and owner. And when he sold, I called him one day to say, how's it going? You went from working for that guy over there to working for this big corporation that's based in another state. And you could tell he just wasn't really happy. And we got into this about hour-long conversation. And at the end of the conversation, I heard myself say, well, if you want your life to go back to the way it was, why don't you come to work for me? And he said, doing what? I said, I have no idea, but we'll figure something out.
Mm-hmm.
So he was here for about a year before we even really got, serious about the idea of even going into the chemical business, and all the great story of how that all came together. Stephen, in a similar fashion, I knew that we were never going to go beyond the level we were at until we had somebody that was able to truly be, if you follow, again, the business book of talking about traction, visionary implementer. I needed that implementer, and had just never been found it, and had one person that came in for a little while, did not work out the greatest. And again, so it was on my radar. And in sometime in 2021, I was introduced to Stephen. I think it was actually through Empower Me, because Stephen's golf tournament made Empower Me the recipient in 2020. That's how I met him. We realized there were some people that we knew, kind of would run into him, randomly here and there. And then we were at a, industry, sort of like a small regional meeting. It was actually held out here on Couchville Pike. And he got up to do a presentation. He had no visual aids. He had nothing. And I watched him basically just
captivate
his envision into people. And and I was standing there, and as loud as anything I've ever heard in my life went off and said, that's the guy. That's the one. That's him.
I just knew it.
And I went up and, talked to him afterwards and said he did a great job. Somebody walked up to me and said, hey, you need a second team for this golf tournament coming up, blah, blah, blah. And I just turned to him and said, are you available on this date to be at this tournament? Invited and everything else. And on the second hole of that tournament that day, and obviously this is a person that had no reason to leave the company that they were at. There was wasn't looking for a job and everything else. On the second hole of the tournament, I turned to him and I said, now, thanks for being here today. I appreciate you being here to play in the golf tournament. The only reason you're here today is by the end of this year, you're going to work for me. And he gave me the, wait, what? And through a series of events, that all, came to fruition. And so bringing on someone of Jason's caliber, bringing on someone of Stephen's caliber, those were some missing seats that we didn't have, and that had sort of completed that leadership team of trust and quality and integrity that we had struggled to find. And then, watching other individuals, is like I mentioned Tina, mentioned Mark, watching them come up, and sort of, raise the level of their game and their understanding of what's important. And so, but we also did that through investing in our people. There's a misconception in I believe in a lot of business, where people want to invest in training. And the training is typically about how to sell better, how to, manage your time better, how to, engage your customers better, how to better to use your CRM, how to, now it's, how to use AI to make your job easy and everything else. But have we ever spent any time or spent any money on training our people how to work together?
Sure.
And that's where we put all of our time and effort. We started that about 4 years ago. And really bringing everybody into a room and basically saying, here's your profile. This is the way you think and process. Here's yours. You two work together. Therefore, we need to understand this about this relationship. And
I like that.
And getting everybody to work with someone, sort of an expert in this, somebody that's trained and everything else. And so we took the different approach of, yes, you can train someone how to sell a tank better. You can train someone how to sell a pump better. But if they can't work together and they don't understand how to work, with external people better, all that's for naught.
Right.
And so that's the investment we made. And wow, it's absolutely unbelievable the difference it makes, especially when you start to hear people start talking in the terminology. When they start talking about, I know that, I think like this, and so-and-so is more inclined to think this. And the fact that you start to understand that all of those different perspectives is the context that you need.
Yeah.
And that is that to me is that working together and understanding the difference in perspective of, the way I'm viewing it from here and you're viewing it from here. And both of those perspectives perspectives are very, very important. So even the way that we do meetings now are completely different, where it used to be a lot of me talking and a lot of directives and a lot of, don't do this, don't do this, don't do this, don't forget about this. Now it's, what do we need to do?
Let them talk.
That's
a hard thing to do as a business owner.
And you do have to, you do it to think, but again, sports analogy. I mean, the documentary just came out about Greg Maddux, where, sometimes he would just ignore his coach and he was going to throw the pitch the way he wanted it thrown. He was going to do exactly, he was not going to, he wasn't going to intentionally walk a guy because he knew he could get him out. That you've got to give people that space as well. That, sometimes you may be the manager, you may be the one in charge, but that person may know something and has a gut feeling and a knowing that you don't understand yet. And yes, you have to give them, the ability to fail. You've got to give them the safe padded space to be able to do that in and be ready to support and make sure they've done their diligence. But that, to me, once people understand that they're in that space, that they can throw the interception and they're not going to lose their job.
Yep. And then score the touchdown. I love it.
Next.
Yes. There you go. Well, this has been so great. So awesome. Thank you so much for being on today. I'm just going to recap for everybody. So we've been talking with Dustin Dowdy, legacy business owner of Southeastern Tank and president and CEO of Custom Pump and Controls. Dustin, tell us where people can learn more about you guys.
You can find us, our website, Southeastern Tank's website is setank.com. So the first two letters of Southeastern, so setank.com. On that website, you'll find our subsidiary divisions of signals.southeastern.setank.com, solutions.setank.com on our SCADA and our chemical side of our business, and then Custom Pump Controls is at custompump.com. As you might know, listening to this podcast, we are clients of KNC Marketing, and they manage all of our social media. And I can tell you that it has been a huge, huge impact on our success. It's been a huge impact on our place in the market. Having someone that knows what they're doing, how to take your content, how to take your knowledge and present it in the front facing or the public space, and understanding how to get that message across has been a massive thing, to the point that, we have fellow distributors, we have other people that reach out to us and ask, what are you doing? How are you, where is all this coming from? Because, it is an ever changing market, and marketing is ever changing. And, if you think you can manage it yourself, you probably, unless you have a full-time professional handling that, probably can't pull that off. So yes, and you can also find us, thanks to KNC Marketing, through our social media on a almost daily basis.
Thank you for that. Holy moly. I didn't think we were going to get that. I appreciate it. It's been a pleasure working with you guys. And it's truly what you guys do is so important, but it's something that I think people don't understand and don't always and take for granted, like how much it impacts their everyday life. And I think that's what fires our team about it, is like truly the impact that it has on the communities and how much you guys care about it. It's trickled into being able to showcase who you guys are, what you do for the community. And it's been an amazing time writing for you guys. So we appreciate it. Well, thanks again, Dustin. Thanks for taking the time. We appreciate it. And I will talk to you soon.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. Let me